Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me today for the latest episode of Impact Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Emerick Patterson, a developer with a conscience. Emerick is currently entrepreneur in residence at Heritage Equity Partners, but he's about to launch his own brand, Urban Party. With his latest project, the Bushwick Generator, he focuses on ways in which to find and keep a place for the existing community in the face of gentrification. Be sure to go to evepicker.com to find out more about Emerick on the show notes page for this episode. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you can access information about impact real estate investing and get the latest news about the exciting projects on my crowdfunding platform, Small Change. Hello, Emerick. Thanks for joining me today.
Hello.
It's nice to talk to you. So I reached out to you because I heard about a project that you're involved in called the Bushwick Generator. And I've seen it described as a community-oriented and community-led innovation lab in Brooklyn, which is pretty intriguing. So I wanted to start by having you tell us a little about that project.
Yes, I will. And first, I want to say, thanks for having me on. And I am a big fan of Small Change and the work that you're doing, and just generally the ecosystem or community that you're creating. So yes, I'm happy to tell you about the Bushwick Generator. It's an innovation hub based in Brooklyn, New York, an area called East Williamsburg. So have you been to Williamsburg before?
Yeah, it's been a while, but I have, yeah.
Okay, so Williamsburg was basically a manufacturing district on the waterfront. There's a ton of industry. This is really North Brooklyn. There's a ton of industry here in the mid 1900s, and the industry has transformed, moved on in many cases, and the waterfront of Williamsburg basically was repositioned into more of a living destination and also a tourist destination. If you look on Netflix now, basically the majority of shows that are filmed in Brooklyn. It's Williamsburg has changed dramatically over the last 10 years, and the area that I've been working in is in East Williamsburg and Bushwick, which is really an up and coming area in North Brooklyn. And what's special about it is that it's highly transit accessible. It's right on the L train, and the L train is really the main mode of transportation from Brooklyn to Manhattan. And there's approximately 250,000 people that take the train every day. So this sits right on the L train, so it's very close to where people live. That means it really has the potential to be a true live, work, and play district. And so really all my focus over the past 2 years has been in this area. And Bushwick is generally a very special area. It's very, very diverse. I like to say that Bushwick has all the ingredients for a delicious urban soup because you have a mix of ethnicities. It's primarily actually Latina migrants or immigrants that came here and have been in the area for a long time, and then as well as a large African American population. We're also very close to Bed-Stuy. So very interesting, very diverse area. You also have all the young creatives who live along the L train. Most of them live in Bushwick because the price of housing is lower.
Yes, interesting. So what's the goal of the Bushwick Generator?
So when I showed up to the Bushwick Generator, there wasn't much going on, but it was always conceived as a place for office tenants and creative tenants, which is really, that's standard for a warehouse type development. So basically, it's a lot that's approximately 100,000 square feet. There was a warehouse, and there was a company there that made tanks. We purchased the site in 2015, and since then, we repositioned the buildings to be, from a tank and storage facility to be for creative office and creative office tenants essentially. And so right now, still today, the building is a bit under construction because the L train actually was going to shut down for a long period of time. It really slowed down the progress of the East Williamsburg, Bushwick area as far as tenants wanting to move in. Everybody thought that Brooklyn was going to be disconnected from Manhattan. So it's still today mostly under construction. However, we're going through some permitting on a portion of the site, and we do have a 5,000 square foot space that is completed. And in that space is where I do a lot of the neighborhood work. And we also do have a couple of tech tenants in the building. So we have a tenant called Paperspace, which is a machine learning tenant. And we also have a company called Remezcla, which is a Latin American media tenant.
So the ultimate goal is what is the ultimate goal of this space?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that it's a standard development. We are, going through a process to build more than we're currently building. However, I would say that the goal of the building is there's a unique opportunity here to kind of offset gentrification, if you will. I mean, there's clearly a lot of capitalized stakeholders that are moving into the area. Netflix is coming in just a stone throw away, and they're building 250,000 square feet of production facilities. Also, there's a company called Consensus, which is a large blockchain company that founded Ethereum, which is also a stone throw away. There's other tech and media tenants in the area. So tech is definitely moving into the neighborhood, but at the same time, as I mentioned, Bushwick and East Williamsburg are, is a highly diverse area. And so there's a huge opportunity to really align some of the effects that new capitalized stakeholders will create by coming into the areas. That could mean job training and job readiness, could just mean space equity to convene for some of the residents that are in the neighborhood now. But in the end, I think it's really about, we've taken the steps to really have the neighborhood influence what could be in the building. And I think that's the most important part.
How did you take those steps, and how do they have a say?
Yeah, so community work is not easy, but
that's for sure.
Exactly. So we have a space, and the Bushwick Generator really is, it's an ethos. I mean, for lack of a better word at the moment, we have 5,000 square feet, which basically have an open door policy for people in the neighborhood to come in, and we also encourage them to come in, and we do a lot of outreach to make sure that they get in the door. So when we do an event, for example, we do a lot of outreach. We have a local nonprofit that works out of the space called Sustainable United Neighborhoods, and we do a lot of outreach to make sure that the people who show up in the generator for virtually any event make up their kind of representative sample of what the neighborhood actually is. Because it's very easy to throw a tech event, but it's not as easy to get local young adults from let's say, NYCHA housing into the building. So we really tried to bring together the normal events that would happen in the tech hub with kind of the young adults who are in the area who really want access to the possibilities that are happening now in the space and also will happen in the future. And we really work to bring these two things together.
So what's the best outcome for this project, do you think, for the neighborhood?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns. I would say the absolute best outcome here is that there's a shift in the status quo of creating a tech hub. I think that this is a well-positioned development in an urban area that is outside a core district, and it's very close within walking distance to a lot of people who could really use training, without the cost of getting into the city every day, and they could use kind of the agglomeration effect, frankly, that has happened in the city or has happened in Manhattan in their own neighborhood. So I think that the best scenario here is where the young adults that live in this neighborhood feel like this is also their home, and they feel confident enough to be a part of this community and really, ask for help. And I think the other side of that, of course, is that people coming into the area and into this tech hub really understand what this neighborhood is all about, and that they offer, their time and mentorship to make sure that the young adults of the neighborhood really have access.
I know how hard it is to make something like this happen in the face of, wealthy development. So it's commendable, difficult, and I hope you're successful. I've also noticed that there's a wiki page that the community keeps for the lab or incubator, which is really interesting.
Yes, the wiki page, yes. We've done a lot of work around open source technology and really looking at what is it that creates a trust in neighborhoods. And I think that I just don't believe that the future is that people are going to shove kind of technology down the throats of people who live in neighborhoods. So we've done a lot of work to consider, what does it look like if, for basically tech to be in a neighborhood and feel like it's something that the people in the neighborhood created or have access to change or control themselves.
Right. Interesting. So look, what's your background and what led you to this point, working on projects like this?
My background is, before even getting into real estate, I was very young. So I graduated with an engineering degree. When I was about 24, we had a crazy idea that the stock market crashed in 2008, that commodities were going to do very well. So we dreamt up a very crazy idea to move to Brazil and tried to buy farmland. It didn't work out. And years paying people back for that mistake and friends and family and so forth. And then from there, I got into investment banking.
Hold on a second. I wouldn't call that a mistake. I would call that a pretty bold experiment.
It was a grand journey, but when you're young and naive, you don't. It's easy to gloss over it. What's that?
That's how you learn, right?
I definitely learned. Yeah, so I went into investment banking for a bit down in Miami, where I was doing Latin American receivables financing. Eventually, I made my way to New York, and I worked for a tech company for a bit, and doing fiber optic cable. And then I had a friend call me up and say, "Hey, man, I'm starting this real estate business. Will you help me build it?" So I helped him build a real estate business, and then I went back to Columbia to do a degree in master's in real estate development. Which at that point I really committed myself to the urban environment, and I said, this is what I'm going to focus on, basically for the rest of my life. So whatever happens, it happens within this context of the built environment or urban. And from there I went to work with a large developer in Brooklyn, really a pioneering developer. It's called Heritage Equity Partners, led by Toby Moskowitz. And I went there to do acquisitions, but eventually I changed my title to entrepreneur in residence, and I went to work on this property.
That's a nice journey. So, shifting gears a bit, this is a socially responsible work that you're doing. So, do you think socially responsible real estate is necessary in today's development landscape?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's more than necessary. It's almost critical. Because we're really talking about equity, and we're also talking about, real estate is a political endeavor almost always, unless you're building as of right. It's really a negotiation oftentimes with the city as to what's being built and why and for who. And so I would say that it's definitely critical that there's more people in this conversation, essentially.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree. But is there enough of it is the question. I'm not convinced that many developers think this way yet.
I definitely do not think there's enough of it. And I would say that I don't think enough developers have the capacity to think this way. I think until we see, the capital markets really transform that we're not going to see real change. I mean, the reality is that, with highly with debt-driven investments and development, I mean, you're going to continue to push rents. And I'm not even speaking about the residential market. That's just that's its own animal. But even in the commercial market, debt-driven investments are going to push rents into neighborhoods, and that is definitely going to force displacement. So I agree that it's also very tough for a developer to fully think through and to fully act on what it would take to be a good developer. I mean, Brian from Shift Capital, I think it's one of the best examples of a developer who is really committed. And I don't know what his capital stack is, but I think that his capital stack is aligned with the work that he wants to really do in neighborhoods. So yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
Certainly on Small Change, we've helped raise funds for a number of developers who I think are really thinking hard about this and working hard on it. So I think there are more, but it's a capital problem is huge, because if you have to provide a return to keep hungry investors happy, it's not always possible to do something that's socially responsible. So they're really at odds with each other, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just get in a situation where you have to basically push rents. It's a vicious cycle.
Right.
And if you're pushing rents in communities, I mean, it really becomes a problem, because if people don't have a space to convene and to grow, then the question is, where do they really go for that? And it all plays, a lot of it plays into structural transformation around mobility, and just the cost on time and resources that it takes to get somebody from, as people move farther and farther out into neighborhoods, you can't have them always coming all the way into a core area to get some sort of training. So there's definitely like a space shift that's happening.
Yeah, if you get a moment, take a listen to the podcast interview I did with Jeremy McLeod in Australia. He's building affordable, sustainable buildings in a country that really doesn't have an affordable housing policy. But one of the things they're doing that's fascinating is they have like 8,500 people lined up for the units that they're building. But they're putting civil servants, teachers, firefighters, people who are necessary to keep the city going at the top of the list. They are always the first who get an option to buy.
Yeah.
Because that group of people are not paid enough and are pushed further and further out. It's an interesting thesis, a different take on the problem. I just find it fascinating.
That's how the affordable housing structure was kind of set up in New York, just to some extent, was to make sure that the first responders always had a place to be close to the core area.
Yeah.
Is this breed architecture with Jeremy?
He's an architect, yeah, but he's really stretching his role as an architect and has spun off the nonprofit to build more buildings like this, and has really sort of taken on the role of developer in many ways. It's fascinating. People are tackling the problem all over the world in different ways, which I find really hopeful, actually. It's a really huge problem. Are there any other current trends in real estate development that interest you the most, or that you think are important for the future of our cities?
Yeah, I mean, I believe governance, the governance dynamic is changing. The hyperlocal political landscape is changing. I think that cities generally and municipalities are they're stretched kind of to the limit. And I think that it's going to be difficult for them to really put their resources where their mouth is. And, so I think that is something that developers or intermediaries are going to have to really take on, which is an opportunity as well, and really manage some of the hyper local type of coordination that's needed to be sustainable. So I believe that sustainability includes both the social fabric and the physical fabric. I believe that they go hand in hand, and I believe until people understand what is involved, to some degree of creating a neighborhood or city, until they understand that either the dynamics or understand what capacity they have to actually make a difference, do something in neighborhoods, and what the mechanisms are to do that. I think that is what's needed for people to feel confident enough to change, to participate. I think the shift is that people actually want to co-create their neighborhoods and cities, and the mechanisms to do so aren't exactly there. And it's not so much about a product or a short-term goal. This is a long-term process of education, of empathy, and of and also of innovation.
Yeah, I agree. So you talked about, we talked about how difficult it is to engage community members. So what engagement tools have you seen or used that you think work best?
I think that space is very important. Having a space where people can access. The tool is really not an app. These are things that definitely complement the work. But I think that in the end, you have to meet people where they are and where they want to go in life. Not everybody is interested in real estate development. Not everybody is interested in local urbanist type stuff. We are, because that's what we like, but that doesn't mean that a young, kid from who lives in night housing or the projects or, around the neighborhood cares at all about that. So they may want to design a shoe, or they may want to make a business, or they may want to learn something and get a job. So I think that there's this infinite complexity in neighborhoods, and to say that there's one tool or one idea that's really going to fix everything, it's an approach that's not necessarily my approach. So I think the tool is the process itself. The tool is deep relationships, and I think that's and also programming. So I would say space and programming are critical, and everything else comes secondary.
So in other words, it's a lot of hard work, right?
Yeah, I think it's great because I think there's a ton of opportunity in that. Every time you speak to somebody new in the neighborhood, you learn something new, and that is part of innovation. I frankly don't see how innovation works any other way. So I don't know what all the tech companies are doing, but I think that there's tremendous opportunity in learning about people in urban areas.
Where do you think ultimately the future of real estate impact investing lies? Like, what do you think real estate in the US needs to look like in the future?
I think you've started with your small change index, and attempting to quantify, impact. I think that is definitely important, and that is the direction it's headed in. I think that ultimately the capital markets have to change. There really has to be a new kind of return on investment. I think that we're getting to a point where debt capital for speculative development, so at least in the commercial office space, for example, is not really the right way to fund a development, but it could be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So with that, I'm going to sign off and thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been really fascinating. Oh, I have one more question I'm gonna ask you, and that is, what's next for you? That's the most important question.
Yeah, thank you. For now, I'm still working with the Generator property in Brooklyn. I do have launching a brand, which is Urban Party, Parti. You can see information at urbanparty.com, which is really all the work that I've done here in Brooklyn. It puts a farm to what I've done, which is really about creating local access points for urban innovation. And so the next step is really building up partnerships around, in this community, really, of people who care about real estate development and believe that it needs to be changed, and growing that brand.
That sounds fabulous, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Great. Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it, Eve, and we'll speak soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye.
That was Emerick Patterson. Emerick believes that in order for socially responsible development really to take hold, the capital markets must change. We need to move away from debt and equity that essentially requires developers to squeeze out more and more rent, displacing more and more people. And Emerick also believes that when there is a shift in status in a neighborhood, it is incumbent on developers to build a relationship with neighborhood residents and provide a space for them to stay and grow. You can find out more about impact real estate investing and access the show notes for today's episode at my website, evepicker.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while building better cities. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and thank you, Emerick, for sharing your thoughts with me. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.